Thank you for joining us. Alabama Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore is defending himself this afternoon after more women came forward accusing him of sexual misconduct. He also slammed Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who called for him to step aside.
This is an effort by Mitch McConnell and his cronies to steal this election from the people of Alabama, and they will not stand for it. They overcame $30 million and voted me in the primary, and now they're trying a different tactic.
Well, this afternoon, the Alabama Republican Party announced that it is standing by Moore for his Senate run. Meanwhile, the White House refused to weigh in on whether President Trump believes Moore's accusers.
Look, I'm not going to get into and litigate back and forth, but the president's been clear that if any of these allegations are true, allegations that he takes very seriously, finds very troubling, if those do happen to be true, then he should do the right thing and step aside.
The president believes the accusations themselves, that is to say the women themselves and their own credibility, can be established outside of them making these allegations. What's the mechanism by which the president would be satisfied that the allegations are true?
Look, I don't think the president's laid out what the mechanisms are. That should be determined possibly by a court of law, but that's also something in a decision that the people of Alabama need to make, not the president, whether or not they want Roy Moore to support them in the Senate.
Well, following the briefing, we spoke with Chief White House Correspondent, you saw there, Major Garrett, about the White House's response to the Roy Moore allegations.
They don't have a good response. This is a pure placeholder maneuver by the White House to not get the president deeply involved in litigating or trying to place any kind of White House political weight for or against Roy Moore. It is an act of political agnosticism. We don't have an opinion. We'll just leave it to the voters of Alabama. And by that, forswearing any effort to describe for the voters of Alabama, who the White House is now entrusting with this responsibility, the means by which they should judge these allegations. So if the president were so inclined, he could say the allegations are not just serious, but they're credible, and I believe them, which is more or less what Ivanka Trump has said, but he won't do that. And so for Alabama voters, looking to the president, especially Republican voters, as leader of the party, a party he is quite energetically trying to remake in his own image, that image is essentially absent without leave in this race from this point forward. There's no means by which this White House will say whether the president does or doesn't endorse Roy Moore, won't campaign with him, no plans to. But as to any of the underlying facts or allegations, the White House is trying to wash its hands of that and stay as far away from it as possible.
Just a short time ago, while you were in the briefing, Judge Roy Moore also tweeted, and he said this is an effort by Mitch McConnell and his cronies to steal this election from the people of Alabama, and they will not stand for it. Is there a way to gauge, Major, where the people of Alabama stand on this issue right now?
Well, I haven't had a chance to travel to Alabama. I just got back from the trip to Asia, so I have no individual reporting at all on this. I've seen a couple of polls. I think this is an ever-developing conversation, ever-developing political atmosphere in Alabama, and any poll right now would probably be only mildly instructive as to what the final result of this election will be come middle of December. December 12th, if my memory serves me, is the election date for this. So a lot is going to happen and transpire between now and then. And it is, I think, for the public at large and for voters in Alabama, worth acknowledging that on this question, on which a lot of things hinge, what is the Senate Republican majority going to be or not going to be? What is the future of the Republican Party as it deals with issues like this? And it is quite clear, Rena, if you look at the Al Franken news today and other news across our culture, this is not a topic that is going to go away. This question of past behavior, whether it was appropriate or inappropriate, it appears we're in an atmosphere where issues like this are going to arise in possibly unexpected quarters going forward. How does this Republican Party deal with it? How does the Democratic Party deal with it? The President of the United States is uniquely qualified to offer at least some guidance on issues of that nature. In this case, with this red-hot issue and a lot of other things hanging around it, the White House wants to take a pass.
It was interesting, Major, to watch the back and forth also with the Franken news. It appears the White House came forward pretty definitively saying we want this ethics panel to come forward. And then you look at the people who came out, the senators and even the people who are running lobbying groups and PACs were saying there should be an investigation. I can't find anyone today who's supporting Senator Franken and wants him to stay.
Well, there's a couple of differences there. One, Al Franken has admitted it. That's number one. That's an important part of his story, that it's true, there's photographic evidence of it, and he has apologized. But I want for our viewers to understand the particular context of this Senate Ethics Committee investigation. That could also be a placeholder that is, in the end, far less meaningful than it sounds, and here's why. In 2008, the Ethics Committee was sent a referral asking for an investigation into a sitting senator at that time, David Vitter, Republican from Louisiana, about allegations that he had used a prostitution service in Washington, D.C. The Ethics Committee, the Senate Ethics Committee, wrote a very lengthy letter saying we are not going to investigate this at all, completely dismissed the referral in its entirety. And the committee said all of this happened before Senator Vitter was in the Senate. It had no ramifications for any public policy decision and did not appear to abuse any of his office procedures or accounts. If that is the standard, then Al Franken is not going to be investigated by this ethics committee either, because these allegations occurred before he was seated as a United States Senator. Now, if the ethics committee decides to change that entire procedure and put itself forever going forward in the posture of investigating allegations against senators before they even arrived in the Senate, that would be one thing. Until that day comes, and I'm very skeptical that it ever will come, it is quite likely that people saying, well, the Ethics Committee, they should investigate this. They're probably well aware of the fact that by precedent, the Ethics Committee won't investigate it. That's why I describe it as a placeholder.
Yeah. And I should also mention, Leanne tweeted, the accusers also came forward today saying that I'm not pushing for him to resign right now, but I felt I needed to come forward and tell my story. Real quick, Major, I want to ask you, though, about tax reform. Any way of gauging the math to see whether the president will get this by Christmas?
Well, that's certainly the goal, but I guarantee you if they're close and they're still maintaining momentum and they need a little extra time, they'll run it over into January. The House vote today should not be underestimated in its significance. It's important that it was not lopsided, but it was a comfortable margin that gives this tax reform package real momentum going to the United States Senate. There are significant differences between the two bills, and many reporters here try to get Sarah Huckabee Sanders to weigh in on the differences and where the president stands. The president is not going to get specific about this at all, outside of the very, very broad and very general goals of reducing tax rates for corporations and individuals, and on balance giving more to the middle class than they currently have. That's all the White House is going to say on this, leaving it to the Senate. Now, the contours of this debate in the Senate are very important, and if they get bogged down, they need a couple of extra weeks in January, the White House will allow for that. But there's a lot of voices that haven't been heard from yet. Keep your eye on Senator John McCain. Keep your eye on Senator Bob Corker. Keep your eye on Senator Jeff Flake. Ron Johnson of Wisconsin has already expressed his misgivings. Susan Collins of Maine has expressed her misgivings. They're not hard-nosed yet, but there are very few votes the Republicans on the Senate side can afford to lose on this matter. And that's another reason why the Roy Moore special election is also significant. Because if Roy Moore were to lose that as the Republican nominee and Doug Jones, the Democrat, win, that would not only change the politics of the moment, but upon that senator's swearing in, possibly tip the balance in the Senate, make this tax reform, tax cut effort all the more difficult.
A lot to look forward to in the coming weeks to see how this goes down. Our Major Garrett coming to us from the White House. Thank you very much, Major.